I know self-publishing's not for everyone. Nothing is. But if you've considered self-publishing for even a minute, listen up, because I'm betting I know what's holding you back from exploring it further or getting started. Number one, you think the self-publishing process is a lot harder than it actually is. And number two, you're understandably afraid of doing it, air quote, wrong. So I've created a new free resource for you. It's called the Self-Publishing Starter Kit, and you can get instant access to it by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting publishaprofitablebook.com/self-publishing 101. In this free training, you'll discover the exact 4 steps to focus on and mistakes to avoid so you can publish an incredible book that's indistinguishable in quality from a New York Times bestseller without overthinking, overguessing, or overspending in areas that won't make a difference. Again, visit publishaprofitablebook.com/self-publishing 101 to get instant access. Welcome to the Write the Damn Book Already podcast. My name is Elizabeth Lyons. I'm a 6-time author and book editor, and I help people write and publish powerful, thought-provoking, wildly entertaining books without any more overthinking, second-guessing, or overwhelm than absolutely necessary. Because let's face it, some overthinking, second-guessing, and overwhelm is going to come with the territory if you're anything like me. I believe that story and shared perspective are 2 of the most potent ways we connect with one another, and that your story, perspective, and insights are destined to become someone else's favorite resource or pastime. For more book writing and publishing tips and solutions, and plenty of free and low-cost resources, visit publishaprofitablebook.com. One of the best things ever is when I interview an author and at the end I say, please come back when you finish the next book because I know they're working on another book, and then they do. And that's what happened today with Emma Gray, whose next book, Pictures of You, comes out on November 12th. I completely fell in love with Emma after reading her first book, The Last Love Note, as did a large portion of the world. It was a Target book club pick, and it was so fun to see on the shelves. Whenever I'm in bookstores, Target or a bookstore, an indie or big box name, I'm always looking for my friends' books. And if they're not there, I'm not happy. And if they're there, but they're spine side out, I pull them out and put them face out because I need them to be found because they're great. One of the things I love most about getting to talk to an author about another book after I've talked to them about their first book is hearing how their process changed or if it changed. With Emma specifically, I was really excited to ask her how it felt to release a book after such a successful release. Luckily, I didn't really even have to ask because she led the conversation right into it. But it's something I don't think a lot of writers think about. It's definitely not something that I think a lot of readers think about. So whether you're a writer or a reader or both, I know you're going to just absolutely love this conversation. I've got all of Emma's links in the show notes. Mark your calendars with November 12th to grab a copy of Pictures of You and join me in your now constant singing of Pictures of You by The Cure, which I have not been able to get out of my head since I saw the cover of this book. Let's jump into the conversation. First of all, are you familiar with the song Pictures of You by The Cure?
Yes.
Okay. I can't stop singing the song. And now I just blame you. I find myself walking around the house and I'm singing it. And I'm like, what? Where would I have heard this? And I'm like, no, I didn't. It's just Emma. It's just because of Emma. And I have to say, damn you with these prologues.
Oh, yes, I know.
No, in the best possible way. People can't see you, but you have this face like it's bad. No. So I don't have the book yet because the galleys aren't or whatever. So Zibby's was so kind to send me, I think it was Diana sent me the net galley or the PDF, right?
Yeah.
So, remember last time when I talked to you last time and I said I had just gotten the book, The Last Love Note. So I hadn't had time to read it, but I dove into the prologue of The Last Love Note because I thought, well, I'll just get the vibe, right? Yeah. And then I was done. It was so good. Oh my God. So, of course, in true fashion, I read the prologue of Pictures of You, Emma. Someone has to study you about these prologues. They're so damn good.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad.
Oh
I'm
my
glad.
gosh. Like, did this one? Okay, so when we talked last time, and I'll put the link in the episode notes so people can listen to that interview and get
Yep.
all the, because we talked a lot about prologues
Mm,
because there's such a debate. Well, not a lot, but we talked about them because there
yeah.
can be such a debate. Like, some people are very anti prologue and some people
Yeah.
are very pro prologue. And so I was curious about the prologue for the last love note and when that was written, and you had said that, oh, that didn't come immediately, that was a
Right.
pretty late in
Mm,
the game edition. So I'm
it
curious
was.
about this one because holy cow, can I just put myself right into the scene.
Mm. It's funny, with this one, I started with that scene. I started the way that it has ended up. But in the writing, at some point, that was moved several chapters in that scene.
Okay.
And and then so I can't remember which draft it was, but it was many, many drafts in. We made a decision, the editors and I, that perhaps we should start with that scene. And I thought, well, yes, that's exactly where I originally began the book. So it's almost like it was a nice way to affirm that I was on the right track in the initial, flush of writing
So
like
what
that.
had you move it after the initial draft?
Just an editorial suggestion from one of the editors who had, and in fact, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that the next chapter is a scene in which the character is waking up in hospital, and that was originally chapter 80 or something. So that was moved as well, right forward in the book, and really, the book that you end up with is so far removed from how it begins; it's barely recognizable.
And this I love talking to you about this because I remember, do you remember telling me that you had some sort of like I don't know how you described it, but it was like milliseconds seemingly, not literally, but before the last love note came out, you emailed your editor and you're like, I've changed the whole thing. Like,
That's right. I had
right.
COVID. Remember, I was
Yes.
delirious, and
You were delirious. That's
I
exactly the
was.
word. Yes.
I was, and I did. I shifted big chunks. I cut and pasted and moved things, and my agent was freaking out because I announced that on Facebook, um, and yeah, it's been such a good lesson to me actually that when you are writing a first draft and you're thinking, I don't know if this is working, and you're worried about the way the story is falling on the page,
Mhm.
just press on and do what my agent says. Anjanette Fennell, she's always saying, just right to the end, race to the end of the messy first
Right.
draft. And that advice has been just so helpful to me. And in fact, when I handed in pictures of you the first time, I'd been through quite a lot. So the last love note had come out. I'd been to the US from Australia 3 times, which is, that's a 30-hour trip from my front door to the hotel. And, it was an exhausting period of lots of interviews and reviews and a lot of messages I was getting from readers who were engaging with the book. Um, and I was trying to pull together this first draft at the same time. And then my mum passed away, and that
Mhm.
was around the time the book was due. So it was hectic time of extreme highs and extreme lows. And I look back and wonder how on earth I ever wrote a book in the middle of all of this. But it really, when I handed it in, I remember my Australian publisher, Ali Watts, looking at it and saying, I love this story. I absolutely see where this is going. And it's rather an unruly draft, but
What a kind way. That's the
I know it
kindest way I've ever heard. I'm
was.
going to adopt that. I'm going to borrow
Oh, I
that.
have I have absolutely taken that on board, that word. I think it's classic.
It's an
So
unruly draft.
it's an
Okay.
unruly draft, but I really think that's what we can aim for as writers. A lot of us are perfectionists, and the book that eventually ends up on the shelves is usually much more polished. And of course, we've put in all this extra work in the following drafts. But with that first draft, I think if we can accept that an unruly draft is fine, that idea of mess and you're not entirely sure if this is even in the right order, all of that, if we can just let that perfectionism go and right in with that mindset, I think we're more
Yeah.
likely to push through those moments of really strong doubt. And I had a lot of those because I was writing in the shadow of a book that had become a bestseller unexpectedly. So it was terrifying. It was, it's always difficult to write the second book, always. But this was sort of all this added, it felt like added pressure. And people saying things like, I'd love to see what you do if she's not writing from personal experience. And that kind of comment, and I had to just stop reading reviews because you can really let it mess with your mind. But yeah, it was an intense year. It was just full on in every good and difficult way. And I'm just so grateful to the team of editors that's helped me to pull this all together.
Well, that was something I definitely wanted to ask you about because it felt like very quickly the book came out, it was doing well, then it became a Target book club pick, right? And so even, I'm in Arizona and I would go into Target and I would get so excited because there it was, and so I would put it on my stories and whatever. And it was so exciting. And I thought, okay, now I wonder, it made me remember a little bit way back when Elizabeth Gilbert came out with her book After Eat, Pray, Love. And I
Yes.
remember her saying, I went to see her speak in Mesa, and she was saying something to the effect of, boy, that was hard because it's like, can you live up to that?
Exactly.
Right? Is that had you started writing pictures of you when the last love note, like what was the timing as far
Yeah.
as
It was, I'm just trying to remember. I really didn't start writing it until after my book tour, but I'd been to the US. It had become the Target Book Club pick. It had become the Book of the Month pick. It was just supported by so many Bookstagram
yeah,
reviewers, which was incredible. I sort of felt like I had a full-time job responding to Instagram for a while there. It was really beautiful and overwhelming in a way. And I think it wasn't until I got back from the book tour that I seriously knuckled down to write pictures of
Mhm.
you. But in those few months, that's when it really took off. And I'm certainly not in Elizabeth Gilbert's league, but I totally understand where she's coming from when she says that second book after a successful novel is just terrifying because it's going to be compared one way or the other.
Right.
It's not the same. And I think that's why I ended up writing a book that's quite different from The Last Love Note. I think I just needed to really try to separate myself from that one. And also, this has sounded a little strange, but because The Last Love Note was based on the loss of my husband, I sort of had this sense that he and I were writing that book together. And I didn't have that this time. I was on my own. And so that was sort of this added thought process that I had going on, which, just sort of added into the mix another thing to keep me awake at night.
Well, how did the idea or when or where did this idea for pictures of you come from or to? Because I think the premise of it, right, being a woman who kind of wonders what might have been and all of that is so relatable.
Yes,
Um,
I think we all wonder that, don't we, at different times in our
yeah,
lives. And we look back on how things unfolded and think if I had done something different or made a different choice way back then, what might have happened? And everything would have been different.
yeah.
And this one is actually, it's sort of trying to do for love and control what The Last Love Note did for love and loss. So my daughter, who's 25, is doing her criminology PhD, and she is studying gendered violence. So all around me, all the time, are these conversations that I have with her about coercive control and all kinds of other gendered violence topics. And so this has come partly from, I'm just sort of surrounded, when you're surrounded by a family that talks about different topics, this is how I ended up 10 years ago writing a boy band novel for my 14-year-old girl at the time who hated reading but loved Harry Styles. And I thought, how can I turn this around? So I wrote this boy band teenage novel. And So that was for her, and this time it's for her sister who's doing criminology. So
Yeah.
it was partly that, and partly just, I've been thinking about all the conversations that I've had with friends ever since high school, where we would stand around the lockers and talk about possessive boyfriends or controlling boyfriends. And then, so go back to your 20s and 30s, and you're just at work talking to your colleagues about husbands who are demanding to know what time they're going to be home, and that kind of, question. And then now, even at 50, I'm having messages in my inbox from people my age, women who have now divorced and gone back on the dating scene and are finding this kind of
No, it's hell
level.
out there. It's
Oh,
hell out there,
yeah.
Emma.
So that's where this has come from. It's a mix of all of those conversations, and then my daughter's obsession with this topic. And
Yeah.
she and I are going to record some podcasts together, which is going to be beautiful. There's something lovely about, as a mum, having taken the academic subject matter that she's studying and turned it into fiction. That's just been lovely. It's been a lovely interaction between us over the last few months.
Well, and I think for me anyway, your first book, it's such an interesting, so with The Last Love Note, obviously is based on personal experience. It read so much like, there's some memoir that's just clearly memoir, right? It might read like fiction, but it's very clearly memoir. And I think in my experience with The Last Love Note, I understood it to be your experience, and it was an and.
Yes.
I could see myself, other people, not my experience, but just in the characters. It was very interesting, and it transcended that way. And I wonder if that isn't part of what contributed to its popularity, because even in reading this prologue for Pictures of You, it reads like I'm waiting for this one to like hit the screen or something, because you can see the scene, and it's just so I don't give anything away even about the prologue, but it's like, how did I get here type situation, right? And you have a line in the prologue, and I don't have it in front of me, so I don't remember it verbatim, but I got up during the Lord's Prayer and exited. And I just thought that was brilliant. I don't know why. I just loved it. I was like, oh, this is great.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Evie is representative of a lot of us women who just sort of fantasize sometimes about escaping our lives. And in her case, she can't help this. She is stuck in a life she can't remember. For a good part of this book, and she's trying to piece everything back together. But I think there's just so many women who are not constantly, but who often ask themselves, what if I'd met someone different, or what if I'd pursued that relationship instead of this one, or what if I'd taken that career choice over this, and we look back and we sort of rewrite sometimes a future we could have had. And it's rare that we have the opportunity to do that. I think in my case, I actually have had that opportunity. And again, it's come in a way that I don't want. And, when you are widowed at 42, you have this wide open future that you didn't expect to have. You had all your plans right in front of you. Suddenly they've gone, and you have to recreate that future. So I think in this book, I've drawn upon that sense of openness and opportunity. And the poor character gets dragged through a lot of trauma and, retrospective angst in getting to that point. But it's something, I guess, that in fact, until this moment, I hadn't even sort of realized that that's probably where that sense had come from my experience of having the rug pulled out from under me. And now what?
Let's take a quick break.
I want to take a super quick break to ask you, have you ever wondered where authors get great professional mock-ups of their books without spending hours on Photoshop or hiring a designer? In less than 10 seconds, Mock-Up Shots puts your book into over 1,200 amazing settings. And now, for a limited time, they are including their exclusive video mock-up system. Mockup Shots is what I've used for years to create 3D mockups of my own book covers and my author's book covers, as well as professional attention-grabbing images that are great for social media. No technical know-how required. Mockup Shots usually costs over $200, but I have a special offer for you. It's faster, has more features, more images, and is getting better every day. They're celebrating this new and improved Mockup Shots by offering a 60% discount on lifetime access with lifetime updates. It's a great way to get an unheard of price on a product that will get eyes on your book, increased sales, and that you will end up using all the time. You can get this limited time offer with the link in the show notes. And now back to regularly scheduled programming. And now what? Yeah. So was your process then for pictures of you similar to the last love note in that you just powered through to get to the end?
Yes. And this one, surprisingly for me at the time of writing, came with a lot of intrigue and suspense and a mystery and all of those sorts of elements that haven't written about before. So that was so much fun. And because I don't plot, it took a lot of figuring out, and I occasionally sort of feel like it's all running out of control in my mind. The plot's unfolding and I'm surprised by what's happening. And a lot of things happen in quick succession, and I feel like I'd love to be able to control that more. I feel like it just happens and I have to quickly follow in words whatever the action is. I have had a chat with my editor about the next book that I've just started writing, which will be for 2025 or 26 or something. And I've said, look, I really think it's time for me to start to vaguely plot a book for the first time ever.
Be slightly less unruly.
Yes, slightly less unruly, with enough room to be a little bit unruly.
Yeah. Vaguely plot. So you've mentioned editors plural a couple of times.
Yes.
So I'm curious how many there are, and do they work together or is it independent? And how does that work for you when perhaps one editor suggests something and then another editor perhaps down the line or even at the same time says, no, I don't agree, or right?
Yes. So it was a really complex process because I was writing the book with two publishers. So I had my Australian publisher, Penguin Random House, and my editor there, Ali Watts, who was fantastic. And then I had my American publisher, ZB Books, with Kathleen Harris, also equally fantastic. And so we all had to work together and work out how we were going to do this, because it wasn't as if I'd gone to them with a completed manuscript. I was sending them drafts as I went through and they were commenting. So we sort of got into the pattern where one of them would go through a draft and put comments in the margins, and then she would send that to the other and she might add comments. And then I would work through, but it kind of went back and forth like that. And then, of course, we got to copy editing and then proofreading, and they also would have comments. There was one stage where I had a printed version from Penguin that I was marking up in hard copy, which is what they wanted at the copy editing stage or the proofreading stage. And I had Adobe Acrobat open on my screen with the US version, which, of course, was in different spellings.
Right.
Oh
my gosh, I didn't even think about that.
Yes. So, okay. and also just little Australian terms that the US editor might pick up and say, I don't know, we don't know what that is. And so, and I've had feedback from readers that they love the Australian terms, so keep as many in as possible. And so we would just make decisions based on, is that really going to snag their attention so much so they're going to have to go to Google and look that up, or can they work that out? And then so that was sort of the guiding principle. But yes, it was a full-on process. And I spoke to somebody who also had a UK editor on the go. So there was three editors, and I just so that's I aspire to that picture.
Yeah, that's something I had. So did Ali and Kathleen have to agree on are there two versions, or
no, it's all one version in the end, which I'm really grateful for.
Yeah.
There were just a couple of little bits where everyone wasn't quite sure which way, they did have different opinions. For example, the ending. So I rewrote the ending a few times until we got it right, but they were all just so respectful and kind to me as the author and said, really, at the end of the day, it's your book, so you can make the decisions. And there's a part of me that just wants them to make the decision for
Of
me and tell me
course.
what to do, like, especially at that stage where you've gone through it so many times.
Yeah.
But I'm very lucky that we all work together so well to pull it together.
So did you have a Microsoft Word document going back and forth with track changes?
Yes,
Okay.
I did. I don't know why we didn't. There was a reason why we didn't use Google Docs
I
or one
can
of those.
probably tell you what that.
Yeah, well, things get lost, and I don't know.
It's weird. You'd think that I have two issues with Google Docs, and I do edit sometimes in Google Docs when it makes the most sense. But one issue is that for every change you suggest, it sort of puts it in as two. So it just more, there's so much clutter in there. It's very difficult. But the other thing that I just recently experienced is that sometimes Google will, I get tired. I don't know. And the Google Docs does. And it says, you've reached your maximum capacity for comments. And so,
Oh my gosh.
Which may be the polite way of, at first I thought it was Google Docs' polite way of saying, like, Elizabeth, you're over editing. But once we even cleaned all those up and we had no comments, it still was saying that. So then we had to save copies and then the copies weren't bringing over the changes. So to your point about it loses things.
Yes.
There's no perfect way to do this, but sometimes for version control, having, version 17B432 is just what you got to go with, in the date, the time, and all of that.
Oh, yeah. It's so complicated, isn't it? Yes.
It can be, but it's so wonderful that you had, it was kind of a real collaborative effort between multiple people, all of whom you trusted greatly.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And it was actually nice to have different people's opinions, and each of them would pick up different things. There might be a plot hole over here that one of them noticed and we'd all missed, or, it was actually, it felt more secure in a way to have more people looking at it.
So what feels either and or most exciting, most different, most about this next launch versus the last Love Note when you didn't really know what to expect?
I just feel that there's a lot of expectation this time I just simply didn't have. I mean, last time I was just sort of this Australian author that nobody had ever heard of, and, it was easy to sneak into the country and run around doing a book tour.
Yeah.
There was no risk. There was no comparison. It was actually really lovely. It was a lovely experience. And I'm really looking forward to that this time. But I just feel like there's a saying that I heard the other day that said, new level, new devil.
Oh.
And I absolutely love this, because it's so true that the more you achieve or the higher you go with something, the further there is to fall. And these new issues crop up that I didn't ever imagine I would face. And so I don't know what to expect, but I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation, because I think, at least, when I write these novels, there's always a deeper meaning, and it was grief and loss last time, and this time it's coercive control. And, that is just such a vital topic, and something that a lot of women, unfortunately, have, firsthand experience with, or have counselled friends or family through. And I think that, I like to take a subject and bring it out into the air and give a voice that people can then, add their voices and their comments to in book clubs and conversations. And I hope that this book does that for people.
And I love well, I don't love new level, new devil, but I'm very familiar with the saying, right? And I caught myself saying it. I said something somewhat similar, the more money, more problems, right? I was talking to somebody who was going through an up level of sorts, right? And there was some new, and I said, I wonder if we could shift this, and maybe it's just me, but problems and devil, it's all negative, and it
Yes.
keeps me from wanting to go there, because who
Yeah.
wants more problems? Who wants to encounter the devil? So what I've tried to do recently is be like, new level, new what the hell? Like,
Yes.
because there's always going to be something new that is maybe it's anticipated. It's usually not. You've got to figure out how you feel about it, how you want to handle it. Sometimes you have to figure that out in less than 7 seconds.
Mhm.
And if I look at that personally as kind of almost like a personal challenge, like how will I
Yes.
navigate that? It feels better to me than going, oh my God, like I can't.
I know.
Otherwise, I just want to
Yes.
shut it all down.
Well, that is the risk, and I think a lot of us. I mean, that is so tempting sometimes to stay small and stay invisible because it's safe, and we don't want to expose ourselves to that sense of falling or that sense of criticism or any of those things that come with stepping out or stepping up. And it would be, I think, such a tragedy to get to the end of our lives and look back and say, oh, I could have done that. What would have happened if I'd done that? Those kinds of questions. I don't ever want to feel that level of regret over something. I would rather have this uncomfortable, nervous step into the unknown and deal with the anxiety that comes with that than to look back with regret later on.
Well, and ironically, it's paralleled to the theme of the book, right? Like what would have happened if it different track, but still, it's like I don't think anybody. Well, I've not. I won't say that. I haven't talked to anybody who said, "Yeah, I'm totally fine getting to the end of my life and wondering what would have happened." Right? It's like,
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
not something that feels. While it feels uncomfortable now, sometimes to do the hard thing, it feels much more uncomfortable to recognize that one day you might have to look back on the fact that you just didn't even try
Yes, that's
and
right.
see
Yep.
what could happen.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's already been blurbed by Oprah Daily, so I don't think you're at risk of this not being. And after I'm telling you, I'm just going to keep with the prologue. It's just so good and so intriguing, and I love it when a prologue does it well, and then they say 1 week earlier, which is what yours does. And 1 week before, I can't remember the exact verbiage. And I think, okay, this is
I just find that I sort of wish I could write a book that is simply chronological and simple, but I just can't seem to do it. I just always seem to be playing around with with time, with memory, with perspectives in this case, and this is a much more ambitious plot. Actually, it really was. As a writer, a real challenge and a step up for me to write this book, and I think that's probably what I'm most proud of. That I got. There were moments in the writing process where I thought maybe I should hand in a different book, one that I'd already worked on. Or it was that sort of. There were these crisis points, and I think. People need to talk more about this, about when they're writing a book and they come to this crisis point and I think all is lost. I don't think I can actually do it. And then they need to have a conversation with somebody who can just calm that down and say, just keep writing. It's not going to be perfect right now, and get through, and then you've got something to work with.
I think the biggest challenge is that people were so quiet sometimes. People are afraid to, not as much anymore, because at least the people I talk to are so willing to say, like, yeah, this was a mess at one point or whatever else. But if you don't hear that from other writers, you think it's just you.
That's
and
right.
You think, because you don't realize it's part of the process.
It totally is. And the thing is that we're all readers. So that's the problem, I think, in some ways, that we are reading people's, 15th draft that's been multi-edited by several people and is on this shelf, and you get that off the shelf in the bookshop and you think, well, I can't write because mine is a mess and look at this. And that, I think that is the challenge. And you get that even when you are comparing it to your own book that you've just written. So one of the hardest things is opening a fresh Word document after you've just, handed in the final version of your last book after, all these drafts and all this editing. And then you look at your first attempt at a chapter and think, well, what is this? Have I forgotten how to write? What's going on here? I just wrote that. What is this? And, it's just that you forget that you should only ever compare it to the very first draft of that other polished book,
Right.
because that would be a much fairer comparison.
That would be apples to apples.
Yes.
So that did make me wonder, when you sit down to write, do you just see a scene in your head from this story that you are contemplating and just put it on the page?
I do. Like, I rarely sit there and think, how is this going to start? I just sort of blurt anything out at first.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not end up being the first chapter, but I just need to get into the story. It's like a doorway into the world. And it doesn't really matter how you get into that world, just step in and look around. And I think that's that approach. But that's just me. There are a lot of authors that I know who do very heavily plot their books and know exactly what's going to happen in every scene.
Yep.
I'm so envious of those people sometimes, but
sometimes people will say, like, I basically wrote a 20,000 word outline. That's how detailed their outline is. And I think, how?
I know. And then I think, well, it can't be that much different from pantsing through, because they're still having to come up with it when they're plotting.
Sure.
So it's still the same somewhere. It's still the same process, but it's just that then you've got a map of what to write, and you could sit down each day and say, oh, here's what I'm writing to. I mean, imagine the luxury. I just really hope to be able to achieve that at some point. But I
almost feel like for me, it would be really overwhelming if I had 175 potential scenes to write.
Yes.
That would feel overwhelming. So maybe I've done this correctly for me, in that pantsing to a large degree works because I only focus on what's right in front of me, i.e. like, what's the next scene or what's the next thing that's going to happen. Occasionally I'll think of something that's out here somewhere. And then I'm usually like, well, how are we going to get there? And so then I stop.
Yeah. You'll love this. I think I got to about 40,000 words with this book, and I had a deadline of about 6 weeks from then to hand in the first draft. And I looked at it and I thought, this went off the rails at 10,000 words. So I ditched 30,000 words, and then I was left with 10,000 words and a 6-week deadline. So I don't ever hand in, 100,000 words in the first draft. It's usually underwritten. So it's about 70,000 that I'm sort of aiming to hand in that first time. And it was like getting a haircut and then your hair grows better. It was like I had to chop this out in order to get for the growth to happen. And it ended up a much better story because of that. So that's a lot of bravery that you need to find at times.
Okay.
To really cut sometimes substantial numbers of words out of a manuscript to make it better.
Let's take a quick break.
Is starting a podcast on your wish list or your to-do list? If so, check out my podcast starter pack. It's 35% off right now with code PODCAST35. This straightforward, no-fluff guide enables you to start your author podcast in just a few days by providing you with everything you need to get that podcast launched without overwhelm or overthinking. This mini course covers effective episode planning strategies for newbies and experienced interviewers alike, exactly what recording equipment you need. You'll get the links to all of the equipment I use, surefire and slightly unorthodox tips for finding and approaching potential guests, 5 creative ways to keep your podcast interesting, my simple podcast editing tips, no outsourcing required, and creative ways to monetize your podcast even when you have an audience of 3. You'll also get my podcast intro and outro templates, email templates for guests, show notes templates, customizable show graphics, and my printable podcast planner. Again, the code for 35% off is podcast35. Visit publishaprofitablebook.com/podcast101 to get started. Link is also in the episode notes. And now back to the episode. Well, it's like that saying, go slow to go fast, or something along those lines. It reminds me of that, because sometimes cutting out 30,000 words is actually not cutting out 30,000 words. It's clearing a path
for
the 10,000 to grow.
Yes.
Right.
And that happened because I hadn't plotted. I was pantsing, and it had simply gone off track, and I had put sort of, written myself into a corner. And the longer I tried to fix that and work on that, just the harder it got. And so I then sat down and I read through from the start, and I thought, just be looking for the moment that it falls off, and it goes on the wrong path. Found that, and then just opened a document called "Ditched" from the book and put it in there.
That's a good title for a book, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just the thought I had. Okay, so last question, I always ask is, what are you reading right now? Or what have you read recently that you really love?
Well, actually, I just finished listening to the book The Haters. It's you'd probably love it because it's a book about a writer who has written a novel, and she receives a 1-star review and looks at that review, as she should not have done.
Yeah.
She looks at that review, and then suddenly she realizes there's all these other 1-star reviews sort of piling on, and she's being review bombed. And it's the story of her finding who's doing this and who's trying to sabotage her work, and it just becomes very messy and complex. And so I was quite riveted by this. It was a terrifying read as a writer.
I was going to say, I don't know if that's a good one for me to, but I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it was a really interesting premise, really interesting. So I've read that, and then I just feel like I'm so lucky now that I'm having books sent to me to read, so arcs of other writers. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me.
I know.
Yeah, and you would have this experience all the time. So I do. There's a book coming out in the US called Tilda is Visible, which is coming out, I think, in February. It's an Australian author, Jane Tara, and she's delightful. And it's a book about a woman who is sort of in middle age and slowly starts literally becoming invisible. And so it's a bit of magical realism, but really, again, one of those topics that women will relate to. So that's one to look out for.
It's true, though. When these books arrive on my doorstep or in my mailbox, it's like Christmas. I don't even know how I got so lucky that there it is. And there's my reading for the next few days. It's the challenge is, it's not a problem at all, but the challenge is they start to pile up. I'm not the fastest reader. I wish I could read. Sometimes I wish I read faster, and other times I don't, because I love to savor the words and the story. And I'm not a speed reader, and I don't aspire to be a speed reader, but because of that, I don't get through these books in 2 days.
It's interesting. I've been noticing on Instagram there seems to be some sort of unspoken pressure to read a lot of books, and I think I've noticed a few Instagram book reviewers sort of own it back and say, I'm not aiming to read 100 books. I'm aiming to just enjoy books now, because I think there's a lot of pressure to keep producing content when they're reviewing books as a career, or it's a lot of pressure. I think reading is something that we should just sort of aim to enjoy as much as possible. And I often think about people who work in publishing houses and have to read that slush pile of manuscripts, and what does that do for their love of reading, and how do they then go home and read for pleasure? Just like chefs, how do they go home and cook? The same kind of thing, maybe.
Yes. And in hindsight, it's why I'm quite glad that this podcast we don't talk as much about the book as we do the process, because it takes the pressure off of me to have read the book, prior. I will always read it, trust me, but to have to have done it prior, especially in the instances when I might get the book 48 hours before the interview is scheduled. I mean, that would I feel like I'm doing a disservice to the time that someone's taken to write this if I'm just flipping through it and just trying to find, quick blurbs. And
well, there's something lovely about having a conversation with someone about the creative process that went into either a film or a book or a song, and then devouring the actual product, and that backstory of what went into it. And I think sometimes that's really enjoyable. I agree with you. I love seeing how things are made, and the stories behind how bands were formed, and there's a lot of those Netflix specials
Of
on,
course.
and
Yes.
I love those. And then
Yeah.
to see the actual product is just adds to the experience of reading the book.
It does. I think it gives me more admiration and respect for the book, because once I understand, oh my gosh, this went through 17,000, edits and drafts, and this chapter was moved here, and not a specific one, but a chapter was moved to here and then back to here. I know how much of a labor of love it is, and
Yes.
it helps me appreciate it so much more as a reader.
Yeah, I think that's
because
beautiful.
that's how I like to consume books as a reader, not as a critiquer. Is that,
Yes.
I don't know. I just like to consume them from that standpoint and not necessarily be looking to critique them.
And I hope you never lose that, because that's the joy of reading, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's why I'm so thrilled. There's like a never ending supply of books. I mean, every time I ask someone, so what are you reading now? Really, truly, I think 10 times that. Maybe there's been one time that someone's mentioned a book that I had already read or was already on my to be read list, but most of the time I haven't heard of it. And so that just is so thrilling to me, because there are so many millions of books being published every single year. If people aren't talking about the books that they loved, it's difficult for other people to discover them.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, it's such a, and I think we live in such an exciting time where we can so easily share our thoughts on books, and get so many recommendations. And I think once you love a book that somebody's recommended, you trust that person to recommend more, and it's a beautiful thing, and it builds friendships. And
oh my God, so many
lovely.
friendships. Yes, exactly. Well, thank you so much. I can't wait to see how this all goes. Are you coming back to the States for this one?
Yes. I think we're planning. The book actually comes out on the 12th of November, which of course is so close to the election. So we've decided to delay my trip to the end of January, I think. So I'm really excited to come back.
Well, I can't wait to see how it all plays out. And I can't wait to dive into chapter 1 now that I'm hooked on this prologue. So thank you.
Oh, that's great. I enjoy it. And it's always lovely to speak with you. Hope to speak with you, in a year's time about the next one.
Absolutely.
See how unruly it's been.
If it got any less unruly, I cannot wait. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, this is your friendly reminder to follow or subscribe, leave a quick review, and share it with someone you know has a great story or message, but isn't sure what to do next. Also, remember to check out publishaprofitablebook.com for book writing resources and tips, and to see all the ways we can work together to get your book out into the world. Again, thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk with you again soon.